Marcus Harlan was just a blind black veteran, walking home with his service dog, until three suburban teens turned his silence into a target. They mocked his scars, filmed his pain, and tried to erase his honor with one viral lie. But what they didn't know, he once led a Navy SEAL unit behind enemy lines, and he remembers every sound they made. Now the hunted becomes the symbol, and the quietest man in town is about to make the loudest stand America's ever heard. The blind SEAL who fought racism and remembered everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the row of identical houses in Crest Hill, New Jersey, a neighborhood that wore silence like a tight, uncomfortable suit. The sky was awash with soft gold, but the streets felt colder than they should have. Concrete driveways lined both sides like scars across the earth, and the hum of a distant lawnmower faded into the evening. Marcus J. Harlan walked with the rhythm of a man who had memorized the geography of his pain. His left hand gripped the handle of a sonar cane that tapped gently against the sidewalk, bouncing back sound cues only he could interpret. His right hand held loosely to the leather strap of his service dog, Apollo, a black Labrador retriever who moved with both grace and gentle urgency. They were a team, one mind and two bodies. 58 years old, retired Navy SEAL, blind since 46. But Marcus was more than that. Or at least he had been. Once. Now in Crest Hill he was the blind black man who lived on the corner lot, with overgrown weeds and too many flags on his porch. As he passed Maple Street, the sound changed, less open space, more tight echoes. Apollo's ears perked up. Marcus slowed instinctively. That's when he heard it, the unmistakable buzz of adolescent cruelty. Yo, check him out, one voice said, nasally and smug. Captain America took a wrong turn. A second chimed in, louder and sharper. Nah, this the blind bat from down the block. Think he's got like sonar like a dolphin or some shit. Laughter erupted like firecrackers. High-pitched, unrestrained. Apollo growled low, but kept moving. Marcus didn't flinch. They always hung out there. 3 white teens, sometimes 4, depending on who skipped school that day. One was Trevor Jennings, son of a local city official. The others, Braden and Kyle, were just neighborhood toxins, floating where trouble fermented. Marcus knew their voices. You don't spend a lifetime reading terrain without learning to read people. But it wasn't the words that hurt. It was the silence that wrapped around those words. Across the street, a woman stood watering her flower beds. She saw everything. So did the jogger with the AirPods, and the couple walking their golden retriever. Not one said a word. Not one looked toward Marcus. They all shifted their eyes somewhere else, into nothingness, into denial. Apollo halted. His ears flattened. Hey, Navy SEAL, Trevor barked, mocking cadence in his tone. You forget how to walk, old man. More laughter. A phone screen glowed in someone's hand. The red recording dot blinked. Marcus felt the tension in Apollo's leash, an invisible signal. He stopped. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head toward the voices, even though his pupils no longer received light. It didn't matter. He didn't need to see them. You think he even knows we're here? One sneered. I bet he smells us, said another. Dogs can do that, right? Marcus stood still. His face was unreadable. The lines around his mouth twitched, not from fear but from restraint. Inside, a storm brewed. He had fought men with rocket launchers, crossed enemy lines under sniper fire, and delivered coded intel with bullets flying past his ears. But this lazy, spineless brand of hatred always hit harder, because it came not from the battlefield, but from the home he had defended. Go back where you came from, one of them muttered just loud enough to be heard. Marcus's jaw clenched. Where I came from? That was America, Afghanistan, Iraq. The South Pacific, hell. Apollo nudged his thigh gently, grounding him. The dog had a sixth sense able to tell when Marcus was slipping emotionally. The bond between them wasn't just loyal, it was life-preserving. He took a step forward, ignoring the slurs, but the voices didn't stop. They never stopped.
You walk like you shit yourself, old man, Braden hollered. That uniform didn't help you see anything, huh? Guess you missed the real enemy.
More laughter, cruel and immature. It hit like glass in the chest. Marcus didn't respond, not because he lacked the words, but because there was nothing he could say that wouldn't get twisted, clipped and reshaped into more online venom. He'd been down that road. Silence had become his shield. But that silence was costing him everything. He passed the old lamppost where his friend Henry, another veteran, white Vietnam, used to wait to chat with him. Henry had moved away last year after a brick shattered his front window for standing with a blind freak. Since then, Marcus walked alone, every single day, and still, he carried on. Head up, shoulders back. No matter how many racial slurs they threw, no matter how many microaggressions were hurled his way like darts, he carried on. But then, a crack of glass. Something whizzed past him and hit the sidewalk with a sharp shatter. Apollo jumped back. It was a beer bottle, brown, spinning, and still clinking as it settled in fragments on the pavement, just inches from the dog's paw. Marcus stopped cold. Every muscle in his body stiffened. Apollo whined, pressing close to his leg, tail low. The laughter stopped, suddenly aware they had crossed a line. Marcus didn't move. Not even a breath. He slowly lowered his cane to his side. The air felt different now, denser, charged. Across the street, the woman with the flowers turned her hose off. The jogger paused, pretending to tie a shoelace. The couple walked faster, eyes down, and the boys? They stood silent, unsure now if they had pushed too far, or if the man in front of them, blind and broken, was about to do something they hadn't planned for. He didn't yell. He didn't run. He just turned his face slightly in their direction, and spoke, his voice quiet, but piercing. I remember your voices. Not loud, but surgical, accusatory, final. They didn't laugh this time, because now he was walking toward them. As Marcus moves forward, the red recording light on Trevor's phone flickers, this time not to mock but in panic. One of them whispers, "He's not supposed to do anything." Just then, Apollo growls, a low, sharp sound that silences everything. Marcus keeps walking, cane tapping with precision, step by step directly into their space. The SUV across the street pulled away without a word, engine humming low like a secret not ready to reveal itself. Its tinted windows reflected nothing but the pastel skies of early dusk, leaving only unease behind. Marcus bent slowly, feeling for the fallen metal. Apollo nudged it gently with his snout until it touched Marcus's fingertips. He picked it up with a steadiness that belied the tremble in his jaw. There were no words left for the boys, for the officers, for the neighbors who had become spectators. So he walked slowly back toward his home, the metal in his palm, Apollo matching his every step. The silence behind him was thick with satisfaction from those who got what they wanted, and shame from those too scared to stop it. But the silence didn't last. By morning, it had become a roar. Trevor had uploaded the video overnight, cropped, filtered, and deliberately edited. The footage began with Marcus stepping toward the boys, his face blank, his posture unreadable. No context, no slurs, no bottle thrown. Just a blind black man walking toward white teens, with a service dog and a cane. The caption read, "Crazy vet loses it in suburbs." A second clip showed Apollo barking once, though clearly a warning in response to the thrown bottle. It was sliced into a loop that made it seem unprovoked. One voice in the background said, "He's gonna sick that dog on us." Another said, "This dude needs a leash more than his pet." By sunrise, the clip had crossed 200. By noon it had surpassed 1 million. The viral hate came fast and unfiltered. This is why we can't let him live in good neighborhoods. Should have stayed in the jungle, where he belongs. Unstable, aggressive. Should be institutionalized, not honored. Dogs always know evil. Marcus didn't see the video, of course, but he heard the fallout. The way delivery drivers paused longer than usual outside his fence. How his mailbox was stuffed full of crumpled flyers about community safety. The phone rang once and stopped. Then again, no messages, just anonymous pressure. But it was Jasmine who took the full force of it. She saw the clip first while in the law school library. It autoplayed on her feed, not even tagged with his name, but she knew him instantly. That posture, that leash, that restraint. Her chest tightened, her ears burned. It was like watching someone vandalize a grave. She refreshed once, twice. More comments, more lies, more hashtags. No one had posted the truth. She clicked out of the app and into her blog. Fingers trembling, heart racing. Title: "This is my uncle. He's a hero, and you're calling him a monster." She wrote like a storm, paragraph after paragraph of raw, undiluted truth. She described the reality, A blind black seal, harassed by local teens. A decorated veteran reduced to viral fodder. A dog trained to protect, mocked as a beast, and a neighborhood that watched and filmed, but never intervened. She attached screenshots, photos of his medals, records from his military file, even a side-by-side of the edited footage versus her own time-stamped video from her tablet.
Then she posted the blog
And shared it on Twitter. Thread 1. They're calling my uncle a threat. Let me show you who he really is. Within an hour, her thread had reached thousands. Within 3, national veteran groups were reposting it. An actress, black, outspoken, with millions of followers, retweeted the thread with a caption, "This man's name better be cleared now." But for every supportive voice came a dozen more aiming to silence her. The trolls came fast. Another angry niece looking for clout. "Nice Photoshop, law girl. Why don't you take your uncle and move back to Detroit? Bet she's on scholarship too. Reverse racism is real." Jasmine tried to keep up, replying to the positive, blocking the hateful. But the emotional whiplash was crushing. At one point she paused, hands over her eyes, phone buzzing non-stop beside her. Her roommate asked if she was okay. She said she didn't know. And then came the message. A direct message. No username. Just a black circle where a profile picture should be. "Stop digging. People like your uncle don't deserve the truth." It was followed by a second. "Keep pushing and you'll regret it." She stared at the screen. The chill crept in under her skin, through her spine. It was the kind of message that didn't feel like a joke. She read it again, and again. Her mouth went dry. Still, she didn't delete her thread. Instead, she screenshot the message, saved it, and posted again. "Now they're trying to intimidate me." So here's part 2 of the story. She included redacted images of the threats, attached more evidence of Marcus's service, and ended with, "My uncle fought terrorists abroad. I won't let him be terrorized at home." Back at Marcus's house, Jasmine arrived just after sunset. He was sitting on the porch, Apollo at his feet, a steaming mug of black coffee in hand. He hadn't spoken all day. She sat beside him and said softly, "They know the truth now." He gave a slow nod. "They won't care," he replied. "Not the ones who need to." Jasmine looked out across the street. Same houses, same people, same silence. "But someone will," she said. "Someone always does." He turned his head toward her voice. "And what if that someone becomes a target too?" Jasmine didn't answer, because just then her phone vibrated. Another message. Same black icon. Same account. But this one was worse. It included an image of her apartment door, taken just an hour ago. From outside. Jasmine's breath caught as she showed the photo to Marcus. "They know where I live." He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for Apollo's leash, stood up slowly and said, "Then it's time they learned who I used to be." As Jasmine looked up at him, the porch light flickered once, then died. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, more distinct anxious punctuation, in a neighborhood that had only moments ago preferred pretending nothing was wrong. 2 police cruisers eased up the street, lights flashing but sirens off, the calm before the administrative storm. Jasmine instinctively moved closer to Marcus, the tablet still trembling in her hands. Apollo pressed against his master's leg, protective and still. Trevor tried to look innocent. Braden pulled up his hoodie. Kyle had already vanished. Neighbors peeked through blinds, eyes darting with morbid curiosity. The Johnsons' curtains twitched. The elderly couple across the street stood half visible behind their storm door. A woman 3 houses down slowly raised her phone, recording not to help, but to spectate. Not one stepped outside.
Not one called out.
Not one said, "I saw what really happened." Marcus heard it all. Even without sight, he had mastered the symphony of cowardice. Windows shifting, phones tapping, the unmistakable sound of people choosing comfort over courage. One officer, tall and red-faced, approached. "Sir, we got some complaints about a disturbance." Jasmine interrupted. They were harassing him. He didn't touch anyone. The officer raised his palm. "We'll need to get both sides, miss." Trevor suddenly stepped forward. "He threatened us," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Chased us with that stick of his. We didn't do anything. Lies. Easy. Polished. Practice." Marcus didn't speak. Not yet. He didn't need to. His silence was already louder than their defense. Behind the officer, Marcus heard another familiar sound. Whispers. Not from the teens, but from the adults behind glass. He used to be so composed. Ever since he went blind, he's different. I heard he yelled at the mailman last week. Aggressive. They should really do something before someone gets hurt. These were the same people who used to leave casseroles on his porch, who shook his hand at the July 4th parade, who nodded solemnly when he wore his uniform on Memorial Day. He remembered when he first bought the house, a fresh start after service. The Crest Hill Homeowners Association had welcomed him with open arms. They'd praised his military background, the flag he raised every morning, the precision of his lawn cutting. He was their model veteran. But all of that changed when he lost his sight. Within weeks, the tone shifted. First, it was subtle. Concerns about his yard becoming less presentable. Then it grew colder. Notes slipped into his mailbox. Complaints about Apollo barking too loudly during thunderstorms. Claims that his porch light disturbed the aesthetic of the street. And then, the direct hit. A letter from the HOA demanding his removal, citing a clause about maintaining property standards. They claimed his home, and more specifically his unattended state, was a threat to neighborhood value. They called it a safety issue. He called it what it was: targeted racism draped in bureaucracy. He appealed.
They stalled.
The board, once filled with neighbors who'd eaten dinner at his table, now spoke only through legal counsel. He was no longer their patriot. He was their problem. Emotion welled in Marcus's throat, but he swallowed it like he had done for years. He stood still, letting their judgment pass through him like smoke. The second officer approached now. He was younger, maybe late 20s, with a face too unsure to carry a badge. "We'll need a statement, Mr. Harlan," he said softly. Marcus turned slightly in his direction. "Do you know what silence sounds like, officer?" The man blinked. "Sir, silence. It's not the absence of noise, it's the presence of permission." His voice was low, graveled with history. The officer didn't respond.
Neither did anyone else.
The street remained, a mural of inaction. Bright porches, green hedges, carefully curated lives peering out from behind fear-streaked glass. Jasmine's voice cracked again. "We have video of the whole thing, before they edited it." But the first officer had already started writing something down. A report, likely incomplete, definitely impersonal. Trevor leaned toward Braden and muttered, "Guess even heroes go crazy sometimes." Marcus heard it. He always did. That's when he felt it. A hand, grabbing, pulling, right off his jacket. One of the medals he wore, an old faded navy pin, was yanked off his chest by Braden, who smiled as he stepped back, spinning it between his fingers like a toy. "This even real?" Braden mocked. "Looks like something out of a cereal box." Jasmine gasped. The officers didn't move. Marcus inhaled deeply. Not from shock, but from recognition. This wasn't the first time someone tried to strip him. In basic training, an instructor once told him he wasn't SEAL material, that a black man from Newark didn't belong in elite units. He'd earned every stripe after that with bone and blood. Now, decades later, a boy who hadn't lived half his years dared to question what he'd bled for. Jasmine lunged forward, trying to grab the medal back. But Marcus held out his arm gently, stopping her. He didn't want it returned. He wanted the world to see it. See how easily something sacred could be taken. His lips curled slightly, not into a smile but something quieter. Resolve. Trevor laughed nervously. "Yo man, we're just playing, no big deal." The medal clinked as Braden dropped it onto the pavement, intentionally, without apology. It spun once, twice, then stilled. The silence that followed was colder than the steel it lay on. Across the street, a woman shut her blinds with an audible snap. The neighborhood had spoken, and what it said was nothing. As the medal lay at Marcus's feet, a sleek black SUV pulled up across the street. Its tinted windows didn't roll down. It didn't honk, but Marcus turned his head toward it anyway, because the engine idled too long, and because even Apollo growled. Jasmine squinted. "That's not from around here." Then she saw the plate and froze. Government issue. Of her apartment door. Taken just an hour ago. From outside. Jasmine's breath caught as she showed the photo to Marcus. "They know where I live." He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for Apollo's leash, stood up slowly, and said, "Then it's time they learned who I used to be." As Jasmine looked up at him, the porch light flickered once, then died. Marcus didn't rush. Every step toward the boys was precise, calculated, steady, like a man stalking a sound in pitch black. Apollo moved beside him, quiet but alert, a shadow tethered to his master's breath. The boys didn't know what to do. They had expected a reaction, rage, begging, maybe even fear. But not this. Not present. Trevor shifted nervously, hiding his phone behind his leg.
Yo, we were just messing, man, he mumbled. Didn't mean nothing.
Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence was a scalpel, cutting deeper than anything they could post online. Then he did something none of them expected. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something invisible. The street faded from his awareness. The cold stares, the cruel silence of neighbors. All of it disappeared beneath the weight of memory. His breath changed, shallower. Apollo stepped back. Marcus was somewhere else now. Kandahar. Afghanistan. The air smelled of sand and sweat, gunpowder and burning tires. The sun bore down like a curse, and every breath felt borrowed. Echo 6, this is Phantom Lid. Do you copy? Marcus whispered into his headset. His voice was dry, but controlled. Bullets whizzed overhead. Shouts and Dari echoed from a crumbled village compound. Smoke rose in columns just ahead. A young SEAL named Reggie was pinned behind a rusted car, blood leaking from his leg. 2 Afghan informants lay just beyond a wall, alive but trapped under debris. An insurgent sniper had control of the northeast ridge, and time was disintegrating. Marcus didn't blink. He surveyed the scene with surgical focus. Echo 6. Move to flank. Reggie's bleeding out. Copy Phantom Lee. He didn't wait for backup. Didn't need to. Because Marcus had something most soldiers didn't. Clarity in chaos. He sprinted low through the dust, shoulder rolled behind a broken oil drum, popped smoke, then crossed fire toward Reggie, scooped the kid like a sack of bones and dragged him toward the alley. Don't close your eyes, he whispered. Ain't no rest in hell, son.
Thought I was gonna die, sir, Reggie muttered, clutching Marcus's vest.
You still might, Marcus grunted. But not today. He dropped Reggie behind a Humvee, then turned back for the Afghan allies. Didn't matter what color, what creed. He never left men behind. Not his creed. The sniper fired again, missed by inches. Marcus felt the heat graze his shoulder. He ducked, charged forward anyway. Dragged one man out by the arm, lifted a broken beam off the other. Grenade rolled near. He kicked it down a sewer grate without flinching. 17 minutes later, all 4 men were on the chopper. He was the last to board. The rotors lifted, wind whipped across his face, and for the first time that day, Marcus allowed himself to breathe. The mission was a success. But the war never really ended. When Marcus came home, they called him a hero. Medals, interviews, applause in staged ceremonies. But none of it could silence the screams he still heard in his sleep. He didn't return to parades. He returned to therapy, twice a week, then 3. They gave him pills. First for the insomnia, then for the tremors, then for the anxiety that gripped his throat every time a car backfired. Each bottle came with warnings in tiny font. One morning he woke up with blurred vision. By the 3rd week the world was dimming around the edges. Doctors said it was age. Marcus knew better. He'd read his own charts. An intern had doubled his dosage of a neurotoxic medication, intended for epilepsy. The VA tried to bury the mistake. Complications, they called it. Within 6 months Marcus had lost 95% of his eyesight. He filed a claim. It was denied. They called it service-related decline, a fancy way of saying, we won't pay for what we broke. He fought the system, hearings, appeal, a 5-year legal war just to prove he had been poisoned by the very government he'd nearly died for. And when it ended, he was given an honorable discharge, a handshake, and a monthly disability check that couldn't cover rent in his own city. No apology, no accountability, just the slow fade of a man who had once led warriors. Now he walked with a cane. Now he had to justify his right to exist on the sidewalk. And somehow, that hurt more than the war. Back to the present. Marcus stood in front of the boys. Trevor swallowed hard. Braden took a step back. Kyle was already walking away, muttering something under his breath. And then Marcus turned his face directly to them. I remember your voices. The words cut like a wire through tension. Trevor blinked. What? You were the one who threw firecrackers at Apollo last month, Marcus said calmly. Braden, you egged my windows after sunset. And Kyle, he turned slightly toward the retreating boy. You left a dead rat in my mailbox. The boys froze. They hadn't been named in any report, hadn't been caught on camera. They'd assumed Marcus was just guessing blind. After all, what could he know? But now it was clear. He knew everything. He had catalogued their laughter, their footfalls, the angle of their voices, like sonar. You think blindness is weakness, Marcus continued, but I hear better than you see, and I never forget a sound that means harm. Trevor's mouth fell open. For once he had nothing snarky to say. The street was silent, until a voice called out, "Mr. Harlan." It was Jasmine, his niece running up the sidewalk with panic in her eyes, and a tablet in her hand. "Uncle Marcus." They posted the video. Marcus turned slightly. "Video?" Jasmine nodded. "It's already got 80,000 views. Twitter, TikTok, they clipped it, made it look like you were chasing them." She turned the screen toward him. Marcus couldn't see, but he could hear the playback. "Blind Seal tries to attack teens. Triggered vet, crazy blind guy." The boys backed up, watching as the digital world twisted the truth. Jasmine's voice cracked. "They're trying to paint you as dangerous." A notification pops up on Jasmine's screen. "Trending Gen 4 in America." Marcus tilts his head, hearing the faint buzz of sirens in the distance. And then, quietly, he says, "They're not afraid of the truth. They're afraid I remember it." Just as the sound of boots approaching from behind signals something worse, two uniformed officers stepping onto the scene, hands already near their belts. The porch light remained dead, leaving Jasmine and Marcus in a haze of blue twilight. Apollo lay silently between them, unmoving except for the occasional flick of his ears, tuned to things only animals and soldiers noticed. The chill in the air wasn't from temperature. It was something older. Something ancient and racial and American. Jasmine clutched her phone tighter. The photo of her apartment door burned into her retinas. Whoever had sent it wasn't bluffing. This wasn't just a smear campaign anymore. It was a warning laced with malice and entitlement. The next morning, she walked into the county records office, like a woman possessed. Law students weren't given easy access to internal police logs. But Jasmine wasn't just a student. She was a fighter, raised by a veteran who believed in rules only until they failed people like him. And they had failed him. Spectacularly. She pulled her laptop out in a quiet corner and tapped into an old connection. Mitchell Rowe, a junior clerk she'd once tutored in undergrad. He owed her. Within 20 minutes she had what she needed. Names, incidents, patterns. Trevor Jennings, 2 school suspensions, both related to racially motivated altercations. One involved a black substitute teacher whose tires were slashed. The other was a graffiti incident that read, "Monkey see, monkey teach." Charges? Dismissed. Father? Councilman Jennings. Braden Langford. Caught distributing flyers for a local heritage preservation club. The club's materials mirrored known white nationalist rhetoric. School swept it under free speech. Father, HOA Vice President. Kyle Denham, known for pranks targeting elderly black residents. Eggs, trash bags, even dead animals placed on porches. Reported at least 3 times. Police wrote no suspects identified. His uncle was a deputy. Jasmine's fingers shook as she clicked each file open, one after another. They weren't just hateful. They were protected. She found an old report filed under her uncle's name, Marcus J. Harlan, dated 16 months earlier. Incident: verbal threats, vandalism, suspected trespassing. Description: unidentified youth, shouting racial epithets. Minor property damage. Alleged harassment of service dog. Outcome: case closed. Insufficient evidence. She sat back, stunned. Marcus had tried. He had followed protocol. But Crest Hill didn't run on justice. It ran on lineage, legacy, leverage. And Marcus had none of that. Not anymore. Back at Marcus's house, she sat at his kitchen table and read the reports aloud. He didn't speak. He just listened. His face quiet, unreadable. But the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. "They were never gonna help me," he finally said, low. "Not when they saw me as a story better forgotten." Jasmine's voice cracked. "But you gave everything to this country. They celebrated you." Marcus laughed once without humor. "Yeah, on Veterans Day, 1 day a year I'm allowed to matter." They waved their flags, handed me coffee vouchers, and patted my shoulder like I was their token reminder they weren't racist. "But let me need something real." He pointed toward the window. "They turn their heads like I don't exist." She remembered the town's ceremony 2 years ago. They had asked Marcus to speak. The mayor called him an embodiment of American courage. A 5th grader handed him a folded flag. The applause was thunderous. But after the cameras left, The same mayor refused to intervene when the HOA filed an eviction complaint against him. The town had loved his uniform, not the man inside it. Now, no one brought him meals. No one asked about Apollo. Children crossed the street when they saw him coming. He was no longer their parade figure. He was a cautionary tale. Jasmine stood. "We're not letting this disappear." He nodded. Slowly. "Then be careful. They only tolerate truth when it's quiet." Later that week, Jasmine posted a new blog titled, "The Paper Trail of Protected Racism. Crest Hill's Dirty Secret." She listed every report, every dropped charge, every conflict of interest. She didn't name the boys, but the connections were undeniable.
The post exploded overnight.
Civil rights attorneys retweeted it. Veteran groups began tagging local officials. An independent journalist reached out asking for an interview. But not everyone was thrilled. She received 3 more anonymous messages, each more aggressive than the last. One included a photo of her mother's car. The caption, "Next time we won't just knock." Still, she didn't delete the post. She stood taller. But Marcus grew quieter. He knew what came next. The backlash wouldn't hit Jasmine first. It would hit him. It always did. 2 days later, Jasmine was in class when her phone rang. Unknown number. She ignored it. Then a voicemail dropped. Her fingers hesitated before pressing play. "This is St. Agnes Medical Center. We're calling about a patient admitted under the name Marcus Harlan. He's in stable condition now, but there was an incident." The phone nearly slipped from her hand. She didn't even grab her books, just ran. Jasmine bursts through the hospital's emergency entrance, breathless and wild-eyed. A nurse looks up, startled. "Marcus Harlan?" Jasmine gasps. The nurse points down a hallway, but just as Jasmine starts running, another voice calls her name from behind, a deep, unfamiliar voice. She turns and sees a man in a military uniform, holding a sealed manila envelope. "He told me if anything happened, to give this to you." The hospital room hummed with sterile machinery, low and constant, like a second heartbeat. Marcus lay still, eyes closed, but his mind far from rest. His bandaged arm rested over his stomach, deep bruises visible even under the fabric of the gown. A cut along his cheekbone pulsed every time his jaw tightened. He'd been found behind the community center, slumped near the back alley dumpster. No wallet, no phone, no camera footage. The hospital reported the incident as unknown assault. The police listed it as possible mugging. Jasmine didn't buy either. She sat at his bedside, the sealed envelope resting untouched in her lap, the one handed to her by a stranger in a military uniform who vanished before she could ask his name. The front of the envelope bore her uncle's handwriting, unmistakably firm despite his blindness. "For Jasmine, only if I can't speak." She hadn't opened it.
Not yet.
Marcus stirred, face tightening, lips parting in a quiet breath. "Uncle Marcus?" Jasmine leaned in. His eyes fluttered open. No recognition at first, just fog. Then slowly he turned his head in her direction. "You didn't run," he whispered, voice rough like gravel. "Never," she said, clutching his hand. He smiled faintly. "Then we fight different now."
Back at home.
3 days later, Marcus stepped back onto his porch under a pale morning sky. His arm still ached, ribs tight with bruises. But he moved with a focus that made Apollo follow closer than usual. He didn't need to see the damage to feel it. He traced the cracked wood along the railing, the spot where the gate had been unhinged and refastened improperly. Whoever had attacked him had watched him for weeks. They knew his routes, his timing, his weaknesses, but they had underestimated his memory and his resolve. Marcus sat quietly for an hour in the yard, letting the sounds return to him. The wind through the oak tree, the hum of Mrs. Patterson's old fan 2 houses down, the scrape of mailboxes opening and closing at 8:12 a.m. Just like clockwork. He mapped everything in his mind. Then he rose. The backyard became his classroom. Each step was a measured echo. He began training again, not with weapons, but with the discipline of sound and space. He used soda cans tied to string, hung them from trees at varying distances. He clicked his tongue and listened for their responses, just like he'd done with sonar pulses in the seals. Only now, the stakes were personal. He walked the perimeter of his home barefoot, memorizing the texture of each step, the way the soil dipped slightly behind the tool shed, how the second tile near the side door cracked just right under pressure. He counted steps, logged shifts in the air, noted silence as much as noise. He began reinforcing the perimeter. A tripwire here, harmless but alerting. Tin cans stacked low behind bushes, rigged to clatter at the lightest touch. Motion-triggered sound alarms. Not fancy ones. Just old cassette recorders rewired to blast sirens when triggered. It wasn't about hurting anyone. It was about warning him, and waking those still pretending not to hear. His body remembered things his mind hadn't asked it to. Push-ups returned to his mornings. Breathing drills sharpened in the evenings. He recited the SEAL motto in silence. The only easy day was yesterday. Jasmine watched from the kitchen window, sometimes afraid, always in awe. He hadn't told her everything about the hospital. About the whisper he'd heard while drifting in and out of consciousness. A man's voice. Southern, cold. Next time, you won't get up. He couldn't place the face, but he remembered the smell: motor oil and expensive cologne. It wasn't a mugging, it was a message, and Marcus had received it. At night, the flashbacks came faster. Gunfire, shouting in Dari, Reggie's blood on his vest, the sound of a child crying behind a crumbling wall. But now, they weren't just memories. They were training grounds. His mind had begun twisting the past into new strategies, reimagining how to survive Crest Hill with the same vigilance he once used in Kandahar. Jasmine asked him once, voice soft and scared, "Are you preparing for war?" He smiled gently. "No." "Then what are you doing?" He sipped his tea, preparing to be the only soldier on a battlefield no one believes exists. She didn't ask again. He gave up on waiting for justice. He began writing letters instead to other veterans. Friends from deployment who still picked up the phone when it rang. He used voice-to-text software to dictate every line. He told them the truth. What was happening? What Crest Hill had become. How silence was louder than slurs now. And some of them responded. A few sent funds. A few offered to come. One even said, "Give me a name and a location." Marcus didn't answer that one. He wasn't looking for revenge. He was building proof of how quickly a decorated life could be unwelcome, of how a black veteran could become a villain with one viral clip. Then, one morning, he found it. A package, left on the porch. No return address. No postage. Just a square cardboard box, sealed with tape. Apollo growled immediately, ears back, body tense. He circled it once, twice, then sat by Marcus's feet. Jasmine came outside, eyes narrowing. "Did you order something?" Marcus shook his head. She stepped forward, but he held out his cane, blocking her path. He tilted his head, listening. No ticking.
No vibration.
But something was off. He knelt slowly and opened the box. Inside, no letter.
No threats.
Just a neatly coiled rope, knotted at one end, fashioned into a perfect noose. Jasmine gasped. Marcus didn't. He just stood, box in hand, and whispered, "This neighborhood has finally spoken." Jasmine grabbed her phone, ready to call the police, but Marcus stopped her. "No, not yet," he said calmly. "I want you to film this first." She hesitated, confused. Why? Marcus turned his face toward the camera lens. "Because if they came for me quietly, we're going to answer loudly." Just then, Apollo barked sharply, not at the box, but at the mailbox across the street. The flag had just been pulled down, but no one was there. The noose sat on the porch like a message carved in silence, loud, unmistakable, and heavy with history. Jasmine had filmed everything, just as Marcus asked. Not for spectacle, for record, for protection, for the moment they might one day need to prove they were telling the truth. But Marcus hadn't stopped there. He gave Jasmine a name, one he hadn't spoken in years. Judge William Calhoun. Retired. White. Former Superior Court judge. Once the only man in Crest Hill's legal system who had dared to rule in Marcus's favor. Jasmine tracked him through legal directories and old alumni networks. He wasn't easy to find. Not anymore. But after a series of encrypted emails, she finally received a reply. A single line. "Meet me at the cabin. Alone. 3 p.m. Don't be followed." The address led her 2 hours north, deep into the pine-blanketed hills of northern Jersey, past cracked highways and long-forgotten ranger stations. The GPS cut out 6 miles from the site. She had to drive the rest of the way by memory and instinct. When she arrived, the place looked abandoned. Wooden cabin. No curtains, no mailbox. But as she stepped onto the porch, the door creaked open. "Come in." Quietly. The voice was worn but firm. Inside, Judge Calhoun looked nothing like the black-robed figure Jasmine had seen in court archives. He wore jeans, a frayed flannel shirt, and a revolver holstered on his hip, not for show. His hair was pure silver, and his eyes sharp despite the wear of exile. He gestured to a chair but didn't sit. "You're Marcus's niece?" Jasmine nodded. "Yes. He told me you were the only one who—" She swallowed hard. "You used to be a judge. Why are you living like this?" He turned slowly and pulled a tin box from a hidden panel beneath the floorboards. Inside were documents, newspaper clippings, case files, photographs, letters, and one sealed envelope marked classified Crest Hill. Jasmine listened, heart pounding. "I ruled the case had merit," he continued, "ordered an injunction, said the HOA couldn't proceed with eviction unless they proved actual harm." "What happened?" she asked. He chuckled grimly. "The next day my brakes failed on Route 12. Barely survived. 3 weeks later, someone firebombed my front porch. Police called it accidental electrical damage." Jasmine's stomach turned. "Did you report it?" Calhoun nodded. "Of course I did. And I received a call that night from a blocked number. Voice said, 'You've been warned. Some oaths aren't worth keeping.'" He paused. "I retired the next morning." Jasmine's voice was barely a whisper. "You believe they did it?" Calhoun's laugh was dry. "Believe? I know. Trevor Jennings's father was already a councilman. Raiden's father joined the HOA board the same year. Kyle's uncle was promoted to sergeant. They were building something ugly behind Crest Hill's charm." He opened the tin box and handed her the sealed envelope. "This," he said, "contains copies of internal memos, communications between city officials, even emails that suggest police reports were intentionally closed, especially the ones involving minorities." Jasmine's hands trembled as she accepted it. "If anything happens to me," Calhoun said, voice low, "you release this to every journalist, blogger, and veterans group you can find. This isn't just about Marcus anymore. This is systemic." She stared at the envelope like it weighed more than her own body. "Why trust me with this?" she asked. Calhoun leaned in, eyes intense. "Because you're not afraid to be loud. And because your uncle saved lives in the desert. It's time someone saved him here." Jasmine tucked the envelope into her bag. "We won't let them win." Calhoun walked her to the door. "One more thing," he said. She turned back. "If you see a black SUV tailing you on the way back, don't go home. Drive straight to a public place. Don't let them isolate you." Her breath caught. "They've been watching?" He nodded. "Since the day Marcus was posted online." Jasmine thanked him and drove off. Adrenaline coiled in her veins like wire. She glanced in her rearview mirror every minute. No SUV. No headlights. Just trees. Still, she didn't take the highway back. She rerouted through town. Stopped at a gas station. Took side roads. By the time she made it home, it was nearly dark. She placed the envelope in her bedroom safe, locked it, and sat in silence for the first time that day. She wanted to call Marcus, tell him what Calhoun had given her. But before she could dial, her phone buzzed. A breaking news alert. Cabin fire in northern Jersey. 1 confirmed dead. She opened the article with shaking hands. The image was unmistakable. Judge Calhoun's cabin, now reduced to ash and smoke. The article reported it as an accident, likely propane-related, officials said. But Jasmine knew better. She rushed to the safe, checked the envelope. Still there. But taped to her apartment door was a note scrawled in ink. "Your move, law girl." The envelope never left Jasmine's sight after the fire. She carried it in her backpack, wrapped in an old scarf, sealed inside a fireproof pouch. Even when she slept, it rested inches from her pillow. The ash-black ruins of Judge Calhoun's cabin played on news loops, as a minor accident. But she knew better. That fire wasn't random. It was retaliation. It was a line in the sand. So, Jasmine crossed it. That same night she sat at her laptop with the envelope open beside her. The contents weren't vague accusations. They were receipts, email chains, handwritten memos, scanned letters from state offices, all carefully preserved by a man who knew the price of truth. Some documents exposed targeted dismissals of complaints filed by Marcus and other black residents. Others detailed covert communication between HOA leaders and local law enforcement, referencing undesirable profiles in neighborhood integrity. There were even emails suggesting HOA funding had been rerouted to a discretionary security detail, language that hid its meaning too well to be accidental. Jasmine didn't just post the file. She published a digital dossier, complete with annotations, timelines, and cross-referenced public records. She titled it, Operation Crest Hill: What Happens When Black Veterans Come Home Unwanted. She opened with her uncle's story, framed not as a viral incident, but as a pattern, a life rewritten by silent institutional abuse. Then she revealed the file, backed it with sources, embedded videos, and footnoted every claim. She didn't ask for sympathy. She demanded accountability. The post went live at 9:43. By morning, it had 600,000 views. By noon, it broke 2.1 million. Civil rights organizations shared it. Law professors cited it. Veteran networks, especially Black veteran associations, reposted it with hashtags like Justice for Marcus and Honor Doesn't Expire. The story was no longer local. It had detonated across timelines, inboxes, and comment sections. And Marcus? He listened. He didn't need to see the screen to feel the change. Voicemails came in, Black men from Louisiana, Texas, D.C., saying things like, "Brother, we've seen what they're doing. You're not alone." Others were quieter, more solemn. "Same thing happened to me. I stayed quiet. I wish I hadn't." Even Veterans United Black Alliance reached out, offering legal resources and a security team. Jasmine printed the email and read it to Marcus as he sat quietly on the porch, Apollo beside him. His voice was steady, but low. "So it took burning a man alive for someone to finally believe me." Jasmine nodded. They believe now, and they're angry. But not everyone was ready to listen. The Crest Hill County Sheriff, a broad-faced man named Don Rucker with a history of performative diversity speeches, held a press conference under an American flag flapping lazily in the wind. "I want to assure the public that we're taking every claim seriously," he said, reading from a carefully prepared statement. "But let's not forget, at the heart of this, we're dealing with teenagers, kids. Sometimes kids make mistakes. That doesn't mean they're racists. It means they're growing." He smiled. Like it was all just a phase. Like hate had an age limit. Local news ran the quote beneath the caption, "Sheriff just teens being teens." The public backlash was immediate. A flood of responses filled the county's Facebook page. If they were Black kids, would they still be just teens? You don't get to downplay racial violence when someone's nearly killed. When is the last time a prank left a veteran in the hospital? Jasmine watched it all unfold, eyes fixed on the screen, barely blinking. Each comment was validation, but none of it erased the risk. Public rage was a wave. So was public apathy. She'd seen both vanish overnight, and then something happened. One of the boys was arrested. Kyle Denham, brought in on charges of criminal mischief, harassment, and obstruction of justice. He wasn't the ringleader, but he'd been the most careless. Security footage had surfaced from a nearby gas station, showing Kyle placing the suspicious package, the noose, on Marcus's porch. The footage was leaked anonymously. Jasmine suspected someone inside law enforcement wanted it out. She texted Marcus as the news broke. He only responded with one sentence: "They're going to make him the scapegoat." And he was right. Within hours, the sheriff gave a second press conference. "Let's not punish an entire community over one young man's terrible choice. Mr. Denham will be processed appropriately." Reporters pushed for more. "Will he be charged with a hate crime?" No comment. "Is there any indication others were involved?" No further suspects at this time. The air was shifting again, from responsibility to damage control. But before anything could settle, before anyone could strategize their next move, another headline blazed across screens. "Teen found dead in Crest Hill County. Holdings." Jasmine saw the notification while on a video call with a CNN producer. She froze mid-sentence. "Sorry," she whispered, pulling up the alert. Her voice cracked as she read it aloud. "Kyle Denham, 17, was discovered unresponsive in his holding cell early this morning. Authorities claim suicide by hanging. Investigation underway." For a full minute, neither she nor the producer spoke. The air felt too tight to breathe. Marcus sat across the room, motionless. Apollo stirred, as if sensing something unraveling beneath the surface. Jasmine looked up. "There are cameras in every holding cell, aren't there?" she asked, voice hoarse. Marcus nodded slowly. "Always have been," he said, "unless someone turns them off." She didn't ask how he knew. He'd once interrogated insurgents in underground prisons. He understood how systems erased themselves. That night, as protesters began gathering outside the Crest Hill County Sheriff's Department, Jasmine received an email from an encrypted address. No subject line, no body text, just a single attachment, a black and white still image. grainy, paused mid-frame. It showed Kyle Denham's cell. The timestamp read 3:18 a.m. And in the corner of the shot, partially obscured, a second shadow. The email with the shadowed figure haunted Jasmine. She stared at it long after her laptop dimmed to black. She'd tried running filters, adjusting the contrast, enlarging the corner where the shadow bled into the wall, but the silhouette remained, a partial outline of someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone who likely never made it into the official report. She forwarded it to a journalist she trusted, encrypted the original file, then closed her laptop. Downstairs, Marcus sat in the living room, his fingers interlocked over Apollo's back. Jasmine entered quietly. He didn't turn, but he knew she was there. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. "Yes," she replied softly. "You were right. He didn't die alone." There was a long pause. "He died the way they needed him to," Marcus said. Silent, unproven, and fast enough to bury the truth. Jasmine's voice broke. "But it's not working anymore." Marcus exhaled. "It never worked. We just stopped checking." That night he didn't sleep. Apollo lay beside him, chest rising and falling in sync with his master's breath. But Marcus was wide awake, his ears tuned to the silence. The kind of silence that didn't feel empty, but expectant. As if something was waiting just outside the realm of sound. At 2:14 a.m., it arrived. An anonymous text. No number, no sender ID, just 5 words. "You're next, old soldier." Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't alert Jasmine. Instead, he stood and walked the perimeter of his home once again, not with the caution of a blind man, but with the precision of a soldier. Apollo stayed close, no leash needed. Near the base of his porch, Marcus heard it, a faint, unnatural hum, the sound of low-grade electronics buried or hidden. He knelt beside the steps and pressed his hand against the wood. A hidden camera. Small. Battery-powered. Recently installed. He found 2 more, one inside a garden gnome, another inside the light fixture above his door. All pointed toward entrances, all silent witnesses, feeding someone else's screen. Marcus collected them one by one, and placed them gently on the table. When Jasmine woke that morning, they were laid out like trophies. "Who?" she started. He raised his hand. "I need you to stay away for a few days." Her breath caught. "No, not now. This is my war now," he said, voice calm but absolute. "And if you stay close, they'll use you." Jasmine clenched her jaw. "You think I care?" "I do," he said. "That's why I'm telling you before I disappear." He didn't leave Crest Hill. He simply slipped beneath it. Marcus began tracking everything. Sound schedules, the shift of routine that signaled movement in enemy lines. Using his memory and ears like a digital grid, he mapped where the boys used to gather, how the new silences suggested they were hiding now, how the mailbox flags moved in patterns, some casual, some too deliberate. He walked without being noticed, wore a hat pulled low, his medals tucked away. Apollo stayed behind most days now. Marcus didn't want him recognized. He passed by Kyle's old house, now guarded by police tape and flowers. Braden's window remained shuttered. Trevor's car had been moved to a different driveway. But Marcus wasn't looking for grief. He was looking for intent. He spoke to no one, walked nowhere twice, kept no trace. He began tracking utility trucks. Some didn't belong, not local. Their routes didn't match their claimed services. One had parked outside his house for 3 days in a row. Another had changed plates halfway through the week. He made a list. Mental. Coded. Private. This wasn't paranoia. It was protocol. In his final deployment, Marcus had been part of a covert SEAL unit, tasked with dismantling underground networks of insurgents. Not fighters. Strategists. Men who operated through whispers, signatures, and erased footprints. What he saw in Crest Hill had the same echo. He'd once dismantled a cartel with less evidence. One evening Jasmine returned briefly, against his warning. She stood on his porch, her face paler than usual, hands shaking. "There's something you need to hear," she said, holding her phone out. A voicemail. Distorted, robotic, but unmistakably threatening. "You've said enough. Last chance to walk away. He can't protect you forever." Marcus's hands tightened around his cane. "They're escalating," Jasmine said. "You said this is your war. Fine. But I'm not walking out. I'm walking in." Marcus looked toward the sky, face unreadable. "They're watching from above now," he said. "Drone. Small one. Just outside our airspace. I heard it last night. Jasmine's stomach turned. What do you want to do? He turned toward her, his voice low and certain.
I'm going back.
She frowned. Back where? He didn't answer. But she knew. The alley. Where it all began. That night. No service dog. No cane. No medal. Marcus walked alone through Crest Hill's eastern corridor. Past flickering street lamps and rusting fences. He moved with confidence, each step deliberate, as if every crack in the pavement whispered directions only he could hear. He entered the alley, like a soldier entering sacred ground. The walls still bore the same faded graffiti. The trash bins hummed with rot. A broken bottle lay near the same drainpipe. He stopped at the exact spot where the first bottle had been thrown at Apollo. He didn't flinch, didn't speak. He simply stood, waiting. A sudden flicker of light glinted off metal near the end of the alley. Then, a voice, not mocking, not young, calm, familiar. Never thought you'd come back here alone. Marcus turned his head slightly, his voice steady. I'm not alone. The alley remained silent, until the click of a camera shutter echoed, followed by the soft mechanical whir of a recording drone, lowering from the rooftop. Jasmine was watching, but someone else was too. The alley sat hushed under the veil of night, its cracked pavement glistening with the residue of earlier rain. Marcus stood motionless, flanked by rusted dumpsters, and the ghosts of every insult he had endured. The walls themselves seemed to remember the scuff marks, the echo of laughter, the distant thud of something thrown with hate. His body, still healing but honed from years of discipline, listened more intently than it moved. Then came the footsteps, uneven, nervous, but approaching. Marcus didn't shift. He simply turned his face slightly toward the sound, calculating distance by vibration, memorizing each footfall as if it were coordinates on a map. You really came alone? A voice asked. It was Trevor, older now, more hesitant, but still infected with the same entitlement that had allowed him to mock a blind veteran in the first place. Marcus said nothing. Behind Trevor, Braden and another young man, one Marcus didn't recognize, approached from the alley's entrance. Their sneakers scraped against gravel. One of them kicked a bottle cap that rolled past Marcus's boot. They surrounded him, but not tightly. Still afraid, still unsure. We just want to talk, Braden said. Marcus tilted his head. Then why the switchblade in your back pocket? A beat of silence. How? Braden stammered. I don't see with eyes, Marcus said, stepping forward. I hear with everything else. He tapped his cane lightly against the concrete, an old seal habit he'd adjusted for echolocation. The alley replied with details only he could decipher: the angle of the walls, the open space behind the trash bin, the way the third boy's breath hitched slightly before each movement. I know where you are, Marcus continued. I know what's in your hand. I know one of you is about to move left. The boy on his left froze. You think I'm the one who's blind here? Marcus asked. Silence. Then Trevor lunged. Marcus didn't fight. Not like they expected. He pivoted, shifting his weight to the left, using the edge of the dumpster as a redirect. Trevor's shoulder hit steel, hard. He stumbled backward, stunned. Braden rushed next, clumsily, more scared than angry. Marcus ducked under his swing and stepped aside. Braden tripped, falling forward, crashing into his friend. 2 down. Marcus stood over them, still breathing slowly, precisely. He hadn't thrown a punch, hadn't even touched them. Just reflex, he muttered. That's when the third boy pulled the knife. The flash of metal hissed against the alley light. Marcus stilled, but before the boy could close the distance, a low growl split the air. Apollo. He'd been watching from the shadows, waiting. The moment danger turned lethal, he charged, barking with controlled aggression. The boy froze, stepping back. Apollo stopped just feet away, barking but not biting. The distraction was enough. Marcus reached out and knocked the blade from the boy's hand, not with violence but precision. The knife clattered to the pavement, harmless. That should have been the end. But then something else broke. The sound barrier of bystanders. Phones clicked on. Flashlights flicked up. The alley mouth was now crowded with neighbors. People who had ignored every previous cry, but couldn't resist this one. 3 boys on the ground. A black man standing over them. A service dog barking, and an audience hungry for drama. Someone whispered, "Is he hurting them?" Another said, "Get this on TikTok." Then one of the boys cried out, "Help! He attacked us." More phones rose. More gasps filled the night. No one helped Marcus. No one asked what had happened.
They just film.
And somewhere far from the alley, the clips began uploading in real time. But this time, something shifted. Because now the narrative had already changed.
One bystander, unknown, uninvited, had gone live seconds earlier. They had caught the full scene. The echo of Trevor's threats. The glint of the knife. Apollo's warning bark. Marcus's calm.
The caption read, "Blind Seal handles thugs with no fists. Just instinct. Justice for Marcus."
Within minutes it was trending.
He didn't swing. He didn't strike. But he won. This is restraint. This is what training looks like. You corner a lion, and he shows you why the jungle fears him. For the first time, Marcus was being framed not as a threat, but as a symbol, a mirror held up to America's contradictions. But the system moved slower than the truth. Sirens cut the night in half. 2 police cars screeched to a halt outside the alley. Officers emerged, guns drawn. Shouts of down, down, hands where we can see. Marcus didn't resist. He raised his hands slowly. Apollo sat beside him, calm but alert. Jasmine had arrived moments before. She pushed through the crowd, screaming, "He didn't do anything." But the cuffs clicked into place anyway. The officers didn't ask questions, didn't check footage, didn't ask who called. They simply grabbed Marcus by the arms and pulled him away. The boys were already giving statements. Trevor clutched his ribs. He went crazy. We tried to talk to him. Braden nodded. He had his dog attack us. Marcus didn't speak, because the silence was breaking on its own now. Jasmine followed the cruiser to the station, live streaming from her phone. The post read, "My uncle just defended himself without touching anyone, and they're arresting him." Again, as the cruiser disappeared into the distance, Jasmine's phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message, this one with a link. She clicked. It led to a private live stream already in progress. The camera feed showed the inside of a police interrogation room. Empty, but the caption read, "This is where Marcus Harlan disappears tonight, unless someone stops it." Marcus Harlan entered the courtroom in shackles. Not metaphorical ones, the kind worn by those presumed guilty before a word is spoken. Silver cuffs around his wrists, chain between his ankles. He walked slowly, eyes hidden behind dark lenses, head held with quiet defiance. Apollo wasn't permitted inside. Across the aisle, his accusers sat in tailored suits, fresh haircuts, crest collars. Braden, Trevor, and the third boy, now known to the world as the Crest Hill Three, looked like prepped choir boys beside their high-priced lawyers and grim-faced parents. The room was split, not just by legal teams, but by belief systems. One half held veterans in uniform, some black, some white, all stoic, chests decorated with ribbons and quiet rage. The other half? Locals, suburban defenders of order, clutching purses and iPads, whispering about how dangerous Marcus had looked that night. Cameras lined the back wall. CNN, PBS, independent YouTubers. Every angle was covered, except the one Marcus had always stood in. The defense team had tried to get his shackles removed before the trial began. The motion was denied. Standard for a defendant facing multiple charges. The judge had ruled. Attempted assault, use of a potentially dangerous animal, intimidation, disturbing the peace. None of the boys were charged. Not for the knife. Not for the noose. Not for the broken ribs. Marcus had left the hospital with days before the alley. Only Marcus stood trial. Jasmine sat beside the lead defense attorney, acting as a paralegal but pulsing with barely contained fury. She had drafted much of the casework herself. She knew every line of his service record, every instance of misconduct in Crest Hill, every buried complaint and doctored report. And yet the prosecution opened with one line that silenced everything. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor said, pacing. "What happens when a man who once served this country decides he is above its laws?" The implication was surgical. Marcus wasn't the defender now. He was the threat. They painted the alley confrontation as premeditated. They emphasized how he'd told Jasmine to stay away, how he'd walked there on purpose. They replayed the drone footage, but only part of it. They downplayed the knife. They ignored the fact that he never struck anyone. He used his service dog as a weapon, the prosecutor said, voice thick with righteous tone. He created a situation designed to provoke. He acted not as a victim but as a vigilante. Jasmine nearly rose from her seat. The defense lawyer grabbed her wrist beneath the table. The judge watched with tired eyes. An older white man with a reputation for being balanced, which in Jasmine's experience usually meant leaning toward order, not justice. The defense made their case carefully. They highlighted Marcus's career, his disability, his record of patience and peaceful attempts to report harassment. They showed the footage, the full clip from the alley, raw and uncut. The courtroom was dead silent as Marcus stood there, alone, calm, using his cane and memory to avoid a knife without laying a hand on anyone. But the prosecution didn't need to dispute facts. They only needed to seed fear. He was trained to kill, they reminded the jury. He knew how to provoke without touching. Danger comes in many forms, even quiet ones. On the fourth day, Jasmine asked to deliver the closing statement. The lead attorney agreed, nervously, but she insisted. She stood slowly. The courtroom stilled. She didn't read from notes. She didn't pace. She simply looked at the jury and began to speak. My uncle has spent his entire life being the quietest man in every room, she said. He never raised his voice, even when the world screamed at him. Even when his country told him, "Thanks for your service, now get out of our way." She paused. You've heard them say he was trained to kill. That he used that training to intimidate boys who threw bottles and threats. But tell me, what was he supposed to do? Wait for a bullet? For another noose on his porch? For another hospital stay? Her voice cracked. They say he's dangerous. But the only thing he's guilty of is surviving. And what scares them isn't that he fought back. It's that he didn't fight at all. And still won. She took one step forward. He wears medals that this court has ignored. He saved men overseas, protected strangers, and came home to a country that called him unstable. If his record doesn't buy him justice, what hope do the rest of us have? The words hit like a tremor. The veterans in the gallery nodded quietly. Even some of the journalists looked shaken. The judge cleared his throat. Thank you, Miss Harlan. Jasmine sat down, breath held between her ribs. The jury deliberated for 5 hours, then 6, then 8. Whispers grew louder. Journalists posted updates. No verdict yet in Marcus Harlan case. Jury deadlocked over incident involving blind veteran. Tension crackled through the courthouse. Some clutched prayer beads. Others scrolled timelines endlessly. At 7:46 p.m., the judge returned to the bench. The jury filed in. The foreman stood. Your Honor, he said, we have not reached a unanimous decision. We are divided, and further deliberation will not change that. Murmurs erupted. The judge banged his gavel once. We'll recess until tomorrow, he announced. Jury is dismissed for the evening. As the courtroom emptied, Jasmine checked her phone and found a new email. No subject line. Inside, a single image. A screenshot of an internal jury group chat. One message was circled in red. It read, "We're not letting this guy walk. I don't care what the facts say." Below it, another, "Too risky to set that precedent. He's still dangerous." The metadata was traced to one of the jurors. The mistrial sent a cold tremor through the nation. News anchors shifted their tones from analytical to outraged. Op-eds began to question what had just happened inside that Crest Hill courtroom. Social media ignited like dry grass in July. The term jury misconduct trended within an hour of Jasmine's leaked screenshot going live. The juror's message, "We're not letting this guy walk. I don't care what the facts say," became the quote that outraged a country. That night, a protest formed outside the courthouse gates. By morning, it had grown into a wall of humanity. Veterans stood in formation, along the sidewalk. Old, young, black, brown, and white, wearing uniforms and carrying portraits of fallen brothers. One held a sign that read, "He fought for your freedom. You put him in chains." Nearby, a choir of teens, mostly black, sang Sam Cooke's "A Change Is Gonna Come." Their voices lifted above the chaos, trembling but firm, carrying the pain of generations on each note. Media tents sprang up like mushrooms overnight. News crews filmed live segments in front of the crowd. Sound bites replayed on loops. Decorated seal, blind and betrayed. Crest Hill's shame, now America's reckoning. Jury bias exposed. Even celebrities began speaking out. A-list actors, NFL players, Grammy-winning artists. All shared Jasmine's original thread with personal messages. This is not just about one man. It's about all the silent battles that never make headlines. Justice doesn't see race? Then explain Marcus Harlan. We don't protect veterans like Marcus. We punish them for surviving. One post from a black Oscar-winning actress read, "I will not stop speaking until Marcus Harlan walks free." Period. It amassed 2.6 million likes in a day. Petitions began to circulate, first to demand a retrial, then to demand the expulsion of the Crest Hill HOA board. Within 72 hours, over 800,000 signatures had been gathered. Another petition called for an independent investigation into jury misconduct. And then came an unexpected tremor, small but seismic. A teen girl, 15, pale-skinned, nervous. She posted a video on TikTok. Her voice shook. Her eyes welled with tears. "Hi," she said. "I'm not trying to get famous or anything, but I need to say something." The screen caption read, "Braden's sister. My brother lied on the stand," she said. "He told me after court. He said Mr. Harlan never touched him, that the dog never bit anyone, that they planned to bait him into reacting and record it." The camera wobbled as she inhaled. "He said it was just supposed to be funny. But when it went viral, his lawyer told him to stick to the story. I can't keep watching people scream for justice while knowing the truth." She paused, wiped her face. "If anything happens to me, I sent the audio to 3 people. They have it. Just someone please help Mr. Harlan. He didn't do anything wrong." The video spread like wildfire. 1 million views in 2 hours. She called Marcus immediately. He simply said, "They knew all along." Back in Crest Hill, the community itself began to fracture. 3 residents resigned from the HOA board overnight. Someone painted over the property standards sign with a single word, "shame." Church groups that had once remained silent issued public apologies. One pastor wrote an open letter. "We prayed for peace, but ignored the fire. We owe Marcus Harlan our voices now." The silence that had once protected the bigots now amplified the people who refused to be quiet anymore. And then, without warning, the judge announced a new hearing. Not a full retrial, but a rare, expedited review under judicial emergency due to the exposed misconduct. The public was not allowed inside, but cameras were. Jasmine was. She stood in the same courtroom, her back straight, the audio file loaded onto a flash drive in her purse. The confession had already been vetted by 2 legal organizations. It was admissible. The 3 boys arrived with new lawyers and different expressions, less arrogance, more apprehension. They no longer looked like accusers. They looked like shields for something older, something systemic. Marcus entered last. No shackles, no chain, just his silence. The room held its breath as the judge called the court to order. Jasmine turned to Marcus, just before the bailiff called attention. "You nervous?" she whispered. The final verdict came without ceremony. Marcus Harlan, not guilty on all charges. No cameras were allowed in the room when the judge announced it. But Jasmine's quiet gasp and the soft murmur from the gallery told the story. The jurors' expressions ranged from weary to uncertain. Only one met Marcus's gaze directly, a middle-aged black woman with tears in her eyes, and her hand pressed against her heart. Marcus gave no visible reaction. No smile. No sigh. He stood as he had the day he first took the oath to serve, composed, respectful, and surrounded by silence thicker than applause. Outside the courthouse, there were cheers, applause, tears, protesters embracing, flags waved, not just American flags but handmade banners that read, "Justice for Marcus, blind doesn't mean silent, and truth survives." But inside the building that had tried to erase him, there was only paperwork and avoidance. No one from the DA's office shook his hand. No apology was issued. No reporter asked him how he felt, because systems rarely celebrate the men they nearly destroyed. Later that evening, Marcus returned home to find his mailbox overflowing with letters. Some handwritten, some typed. One was from a veteran in Montana, who wrote, "You stood for all of us. You reminded the world that black soldiers bleed too." But Marcus didn't respond to any of them. He sat on his porch, Apollo's head in his lap, and stared toward the horizon, with a kind of exhausted peace. Jasmine sat next to him, the verdict still echoing in her chest like a drumbeat that wouldn't stop. "You could leave now," she said quietly. "Start over. New state. New name. Disappear." He nodded slowly. "I could." A long silence passed between them. "But that's not what soldiers do," he added. "We don't run from the battlefield just because we made it out alive." Jasmine looked at him, truly looked, and saw the steel forming behind his stillness. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, the next morning, he took a walk to the far side of Crest Hill, past the manicured lawns and cold stairs, to the edge of town, where a rusting old brick building sat boarded up beside a cracked parking lot and a worn-out sign that once read, Crest Hill Community Center. It had been abandoned for years, forgotten. Like him, he made 3 calls that day. One to a local real estate broker, one to a veterans nonprofit he used to mentor for, and one to a carpenter he knew from deployment, now based in Philly. Within a week, the building belonged to him. He paid cash. Marcus didn't want a monument. He wanted a mission. He began restoring the center with quiet intensity. Jasmine helped secure permits. Volunteers came from across the state, mostly vets, mostly black, some blind, many scarred. They patched walls, rebuilt ramps, painted murals. One veteran painted a mural of Marcus and Apollo in grayscale, strong, stoic, facing forward. Underneath, the word, "We train in silence, we walk in storms." The space transformed quickly. Room by room it became something different, a place for blind veterans to train in mobility, self-defense and confidence, not to fight, but to refuse to be afraid. The media began circling again, articles titled From Target to Teacher, and the blind seal who built a fortress of hope made national headlines. Marcus agreed to one interview. Only one. He sat calmly, his hands folded in his lap, and said, "I don't want revenge, I want resilience. And I want every blind vet to know, we're not invisible." But not everyone was inspired. Some watched from the sidelines with clenched jaws and bitter eyes. The same HOA board members who once tried to evict him now remained silent. The same sheriff who had called the boys just teens refused to answer any more questions. Rumors spread that some families were organizing privately, that they didn't like what Marcus was building. One evening just before sunset, Marcus stood in the parking lot, checking the newly installed security lights. The lot was empty, almost, until he heard the unmistakable sound of leather shoes on pavement. Confident, purposeful. He turned slightly, Apollo tensing at his side. A man approached, tall, red-faced, a jacket too clean for the weather. Trevor Jennings's father, Councilman Jennings. His posture was rigid, his eyes too calm to be casual. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then the councilman spoke. "You think this makes you a hero again?" Marcus didn't answer. "You made my son a pariah. You painted my family as racists." Marcus tilted his head. "I didn't paint anything. I survived your silence." The man's smile faltered. "You should have taken the verdict and disappeared," he said, stepping closer. "You don't belong here. You've stirred enough of the wrong people." Marcus's face didn't move. "I never belonged here," he replied. "But I stayed anyway. Now I build." The councilman's eyes narrowed. "You're making enemies you can't see." Marcus finally smiled. "I never had to see them," he said softly. "They always made themselves known." The man stepped back. No threats, no promises. Just one last glare before he turned and walked away. That night, Jasmine returned to the community center and found Marcus alone in the training hall. He was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, Apollo beside him. His hands trembled slightly. Jasmine knelt beside him. "You okay?" she whispered. He nodded slowly, then held out an envelope. "It was on the doorstep," he said. Jasmine opened it. Inside a single photo, her mother's face circled in red, and 4 words, "You're building a target." The morning after the threat, Jasmine didn't sleep. She paced the upstairs hallway of Marcus's home, while he sat in silence downstairs. Apollo curled against his leg like a sentinel. The photo of Jasmine's mother still lay on the table, the red circle around her face burning like a target in both their minds. They didn't call the police, not because they didn't want protection, but because they knew better than to trust shields made of bureaucracy. Marcus simply said, "He's coming back." And Jasmine knew exactly who he was. At dusk, Marcus stood in the lot behind the community center. He wore no medals, no armor, just an old Navy jacket that still held the scent of salt and sand, the weight of places he no longer named. Apollo was close. His ears perked. The air was thick with summer humidity and something heavier, resolve. He had asked Jasmine not to come. She hadn't listened. She was watching from inside, hidden behind tinted windows, phone recording silently. The car pulled in slow, black, unmarked. Councilman Jennings stepped out wearing no suit this time, just jeans and a windbreaker zipped halfway up. But his hands didn't stay visible. "Even now you stand like you're the righteous one," Jennings spat. Like you didn't ruin everything. Marcus didn't flinch. You drew your own lines. I just stopped stepping around them. Jennings stepped closer. His voice turned jagged. My son can't walk into a restaurant without being filmed. My wife can't show her face at church. And your niece, she made us a national disgrace. Marcus tilted his head. No. Your silence did that. Your power protected hate, until it choked on itself. Jennings's hand moved quickly. Inside his jacket, the metal flashed. A small handgun, compact, dull black. You always wanted to be a martyr, Jennings snarled, voice shaking now. Maybe it's time you earned it. Apollo barked. His muscles tensed, but Marcus raised his cane with one hand, signaling the dog to stay. And then, with precision only a seal would still possess, Marcus stepped forward, tilted his body sideways, and brought the tip of his cane sharply against Jennings's wrist. One strike. Clean. Controlled. The gun dropped. Jennings cried out, falling to one knee. Marcus didn't move again. He didn't grab the weapon. He didn't retaliate. He simply stood there, breathing. Calm. Still. Jennings looked up, eyes wide with something like disbelief and fear. You're not going to kill me? He spat, trying to rise. Marcus spoke slowly. My war's over. Let yours begin. The sound of sirens rose in the distance, and then the blue lights painted the parking lot like a warning. Police pulled in, guns raised, until they saw Marcus standing still, the councilman on the ground. Weapon feet away. Apollo stood between them, unmoved. Jasmine stepped outside, phone in hand. The officer nearest her paused. You caught that? She nodded. Every word. The video exploded online within hours. Marcus Harlan, unarmed, calm, refusing vengeance. Clips flooded Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. The blind who sees more than us all became the caption that defined the moment. Even critics who had once labeled him unstable began shifting. News anchors called it the clearest example of disciplined restraint in the face of unrepentant hate. Veterans released statements calling Marcus a leader of honor and a model of moral strength. Councilman Jennings was arrested the next morning for assault, attempted murder, and conspiracy to intimidate a federal witness. His home was raided. Files were found. Dozens of communications linking him to threats against Jasmine and others. Anonymous envelopes traced back to addresses associated with his campaign donors. Everything unraveled. Everything that once protected him collapsed. Weeks later, the community center was officially renamed the Marcus J. Harlan Foundation for Justice and Resilience. Jasmine stood at the podium, reading from prepared notes, her voice steady. We build what others tried to bury. We rise where others tried to silence. And today we honor a man who showed us that dignity doesn't come from medals. It comes from never letting them change who you are. Applause roared. Marcus didn't speak, but he placed his hand over his chest, where his medals had once hung. Later that night, back home, Jasmine opened the mailbox and found a letter addressed only to her. No stamp, no return, just Harvard Law School, Office of Admissions. Inside, a formal acceptance letter, full scholarship, personal note at the bottom from the dean. We followed your work and your voice. We'd be honored to have you lead the next generation of advocates. She ran inside, holding the letter in trembling hands. Marcus sat at the dining table, repairing a broken part of Apollo's harness. Uncle, she said, holding it out. He touched the paper, fingers tracing the embossed seal. You're going to change more than laws, he whispered. Jasmine smiled, eyes wet. You changed me first. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Jasmine noticed a second envelope beneath the pile of mail. Plain. Sealed in red wax. Stamped with 2 words. Top secret. Marcus Harlan. She picked it up. There was no return address, just a faded government seal on the flap. Uncle, she said, holding it gently. You expecting something classified? Marcus turned his face toward her. I thought those files were destroyed. She opened it slowly. Inside, a single page, tight, faintly aged. At the top, deep file unauthenticated black OPS. 2005. Candidate. Harlan. She read further, and froze. Her face drained. She looked at Marcus. You were part of something that doesn't exist anymore. Marcus didn't move. Then it's about to matter again. As Jasmine flipped the page, a line near the bottom caught her breath. Operative Harlan. Activated upon breach of U.S. veteran integrity thresholds. If received, contact embedded agent for declassification. She looked up. Uncle, are they calling you back? Marcus turned away, face unreadable. No, he said. They're finally admitting I never left. The book began as a journal entry, scratched out in the quiet hours, when Jasmine couldn't sleep. At first it was just for her. Memories, moments, emotions too large to say aloud. But the more she wrote, the more she realized she wasn't just telling his story. She was documenting a blueprint for survival. By the time Harvard orientation rolled around, the pages had become chapters, and the chapters had become a manuscript. She submitted it on a whim to a publisher known for civil rights histories. Within 3 weeks, they offered her a contract. The title came to her in a dream. Echoes in the Dark. The Blind Seal, Who Fought Racism. It hit shelves 1 year after Marcus's acquittal. Within a month, it was a bestseller. Critics called it a revelation, searing and graceful, and a narrative that refuses to let America look away. Jasmine didn't go on a media tour. She let the book speak. She let his silence be the loudest chapter. Meanwhile, Marcus never left Crest Hill. The community center expanded. What began as a reclaimed space became a movement. Veterans from across the country arrived blind, partially sighted, or simply broken in ways people couldn't see. They came for training, for clarity, for the quiet kind of strength Marcus radiated. They found a man who never yelled, who never demanded respect, who simply moved through every obstacle as if it were an old memory he'd already overcome. Apollo remained his constant companion, graying now but no less attentive. The pair became symbols far beyond their small town. Veterans called the center the lighthouse. Journalists referred to Marcus as the quiet commander. And in Washington, change rippled outward. Jasmine's book had prompted more than conversation. It had inspired legislation. The Harlan Act, signed into law by a bipartisan majority, made it a federal hate crime to target disabled veterans based on race, disability, or service history. It mandated protections at local and national levels, and created oversight boards to investigate racial bias in veteran healthcare and legal cases. Marcus didn't attend the signing ceremony. He watched it from a small room at the center, Apollo by his side, Jasmine's voice playing from the podium on TV. If my uncle taught us anything, she said, it's that justice doesn't knock. It's built. And when you try to silence the right man, you only amplify his echo. The final scene wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a Thursday. Overcast sky. Marcus stood in the center's courtyard, cane in hand, surrounded by a dozen young men and women, each one blind or partially sighted, each one a veteran or child of one. They wore pads, gloves, old uniforms, not to prepare for war, but for confidence, for memory, for resistance without violence. He tapped the ground twice with his cane. Listen, he said, not with your ears, but with your feet. They moved in rhythm, breathing together, trusting their instincts, learning how to own space that once felt dangerous. A teenage girl blind in her right eye, fresh from deployment, laughed when she missed a movement. Sorry, sir, she said. Marcus shook his head. You only apologize when you stop showing up. You're here. That's the win. In the distance, Jasmine stood with a reporter from Time. She watched him move, speak, instruct, not like a survivor, but a commander still in command. The reporter whispered, Do you think he forgave them? The town? Jasmine thought for a moment. I think, she said slowly, he stopped needing their approval. That afternoon, Marcus sat alone, under the oak tree behind the center, Apollo resting at his feet, his cane across his lap. He traced his fingers over a small plaque that had been installed in the bark. To those who see by listening, and those who speak by standing still. Jasmine approached quietly and sat beside him, handing him a fresh page from her journal. He read it by touch. Braille now. Second nature. They tried to erase him, but they made him a symbol. He smiled. But before he could respond, a soft voice called out from the field. Excuse me, are you Mr. Harlan? Marcus tilted his head. The voice was young, nervous, white. The boy couldn't have been older than 16. I'm here to train, sir, he said. Marcus nodded once. You'll need gloves and shoes that don't slide. The boy stepped closer, his hands shaking. My name's Evan, he said. Evan Jennings. The name hit like a silent wind. Jasmine's eyes widened. She turned to Marcus, unsure. The boy saw the hesitation. My father was Councilman Jennings, he said. He died in prison last month. Neither Marcus nor Jasmine spoke. I'm not here for sympathy, Evan continued. I never believed what he said about you. And after he passed, I found some of his letters, things he hid. I think he was scared of you, because you never hated him back. Marcus's expression didn't change. I'm not my father, Evan added quickly, but I want to be better than he ever let me be. Marcus stood slowly. Apollo rose with him. Then start with silence, Marcus said gently, and let your actions speak. The boy nodded and walked toward the other trainees. Jasmine looked at Marcus. Are you sure? He nodded. Let the next generation decide the kind of country we become. As the training session resumed, Jasmine's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number lit up the screen. We read the file. There's more. And Marcus isn't the only one. Attached was a blurred image, a second classified folder, stamped with the same words, Tape Ye Secret, Black Veteran Initiatives. Redacted. Jasmine looked up at Marcus, who stood still beneath the tree, listening to a world that had finally started to listen back. If this story shook something awake in you, don't scroll past it. Share it with someone who still believes silence keeps them safe. Ask yourself, what would you do if justice knocked, and no one opened the door? Because Marcus Harlan's fight isn't fiction, it's a mirror, and the next reflection might be yours.